All right, so when did I first hear the rumors of underground tunnels? I was really young. I was in elementary school. I went to Naval Avenue, and I remember the buses were loading out front after school, which means it's before they cut the bus road in the back. So maybe that puts me in first grade. So as I'm getting on the bus, I notice there's this van, and it's parked off to the side, and kids are getting into this van. How weird. We're all getting on the buses to go home, and these other kids are getting into this like white generic van, like the ones my mom told me never to get into. Talk about stranger danger. So the next day at recess, I find one of the girls that I'd seen getting into the van. And I asked her, hey, what's with the van? She tells me that the bus can't take her home, so they have to send a special van to pick her up from school. I said, where do you live? On the base, she says. What is base? I asked. Imagine trying to explain that concept to a 6-year-old. So she's trying to explain what the base is to me. You know, it's a place for really important people, like my dad. My dad is so important that we have secret tunnels under our house, just in case. Just in case what? I asked her. Her eyes got really big. She leaned in and she started to whisper, the end of the world. If the end of the world comes, we have to go into the tunnels and run away. We practiced it last week. Now, putting OPSEC concerns aside, it's actually not a secret that there are underground tunnels in Bremerton. Some of them are open to the public. You've probably driven through the underground tunnel from the ferry terminal that opens up onto Burwell, or seen the Yardbirds going into the old Craven tunnel heading to work at the shipyard. That tunnel was built sometime after World War I to connect what was then the Navy Hotel to the base. There used to be a building there, a big brick building, and Park Street dead-ended. It didn't continue to Burwell. And that building was called Craven Center, which is why we call it the Craven Tunnel. But Craven Center is a big topic on its own, and it probably deserves its own episode. So for now, we're going to stick to the tunnel. The tunnel definitely existed by December of 1952, when I started finding mentions of it in the Sun newspaper. In 1963, the Navy decides they don't need the land or the building anymore, and they sell it to the city of Bremerton. And because they can't just have people wandering onto base, they block the entrance to the Craven Tunnel with a concrete slab. And then the tunnel sits abandoned for 20 years, in plain view, but blocked off. And as the old Navy Hotel sort of develops into a community center, Craven Center, people are coming and going all the time. And there it is, the blocked off entrance to the mysterious tunnel. That's bound to start some rumors. After being refurbished, the tunnel reopened in 1982 for shipyard foot traffic. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Where there's some, there's bound to be more. For every tunnel we know about, there's probably more we'll never know about. Are there secret emergency tunnels under the base, like that little girl on the playground said? Well, the short answer is yeah. The earliest reference I could find to tunnels being dug under Bremerton is from 1939, and those tunnels were used for the dry docks at the shipyard. For anyone who is unfamiliar, the dry docks we had in the early 1900s were the largest in the United States. They were state-of-the-art, and they established PSNS as the most capable shipyard in the country. The pumping on dry dock number 4 and the construction of dry dock number 5 involved the installation of a 360-foot tunnel completed by 1940. Not really glamorous though, is it? Dry dock tunnels probably used for maintenance or pumping water. You know, it does sound fascinating though. Giant World War II air raid tunnels. For Navy Day in 1945, PSNS opened its gates to the public to show off the giant air raid tunnels that they had constructed to protect shipyard workers in case of attack. These tunnels were built directly into the hillsides, and since then, the Navy has continued to use them for a variety of reasons. In 1954, they were used for Operation Rideout, a Cold War atomic bomb drill. At one point, they served as a firing range, although most of them are used for general or document storage. They also hold things like telephone switchboards and a tool calibration lab. Josh Farley did a really great article about this for The Sun a couple of years ago, and it's worth the read. The tunnels have been rebranded as Building 661, and the folks who work in them are called tunnel rats instead of yardbirds. Gosh, I love that. Also, in World War II, it was common to see barrage balloons and gun emplacements installed around town. These were usually concrete structures. The balloons would be anchored to big concrete blocks, and the gun emplacements had to be able to support the weight of surface-to-air weaponry, really big guns. And so they would be mounted to concrete structures, and those structures would generally be dug down underground to protect soldiers who were manning these guns. Sometimes the emplacements were dug into the earth like bunkers or hilly cliff sides and terrain. And after the war, the balloons were deflated, but if you look, you can still find the remnants of the anchors, and the guns are retired and taken away, but what about the emplacements themselves? You know, it costs money to demo concrete structures, and with the war over, they were most likely abandoned in place. On May 13th of 1949, one of these abandoned gun emplacements caught fire at 616 Shore Drive in Manette. The underground portion of this was open and empty. Kids used to hang around in them, homeless people used to sleep in them, and most commonly, people used to dump trash in them. And that was what caught fire. I pulled up 616 Shore Drive on Google Maps out of curiosity and found it's an empty lot. A random empty lot between two houses. I wonder if it's still under there. I wonder how many of these old gun emplacements are out there, just filled in, lurking underneath us. And as far as what these battlements looked like, there's still one remaining that isn't filled in that you can see, and it's in Manchester State Park, although they don't let you go inside of it. Other notable mentions of tunnels I found were references to an original ferry tunnel that someone fled into while trying to escape the cops in 1981, an underground tunnel oil spill that happened at PSNS in 1987, some mentions that 1025 Burwell Street had an underground tunnel to base when it was built in 1974. It used to be a bank, and apparently it had a branch on base and a branch off base, and so they installed communications lines directly between them through some form of tunnel that ran under from one to the other. And that building is now the police station on Burwell. We also have to talk about the downtown Bremerton buildings. And we're now entering much grayer territory. Everything up until now is documented in some way, usually from old newspapers. And from here on out, we're going on word of mouth. So the original Bremerton, it's all bought and sold by one guy, right? William Bremer. He builds Bremerton from the ground up. He buys the land, he sells shipyard to the Navy, and then the town comes up around it. And buildings back then are usually large brick affairs, expensive to heat in winter. So what's an entrepreneur to do? The answer is shared basements. There are large old buildings downtown that are connected on the basement level. And this was done originally so that they could share a furnace to help heat the buildings and keep the costs down in winter. This means you can go into one building, go through the connected basement level, and then come out in another building. I'd call that an underground tunnel. Most of these stories are like first-hand accounts from older folks who used to work in the buildings in the 60s and 70s. They float around on Facebook. They used to get bored. They didn't have cell phones, so they'd be working and they'd go exploring. Or their boss would ask them, take this box down and store it down here in the basement level. Take this to the storage room. But the storage rooms would be these giant, cavernous, underground spaces. Amy Burnett has talked openly about the large basement level of the building she used to own at 4th and Pacific. She often rented the large space out to artists or to other businesses to use. I read more than one rumor about a possible maintenance tunnel that runs under the water alongside the Manette Bridge. I don't know how realistic that one is, Usually when you have a bridge, if you need to run things across the water, you just run it across the bridge. So I'm not sure how likely that one is. Tunnels that run out from under downtown buildings towards the water, towards cliff faces. Some people think that buildings have tunnels that run underground towards the base. The most notable rumor I came across there was, we used to call them the Chester Apartments. It's called Frank Chop now. And these, to be clear, I'm not debating whether or not the Chester Apartments are a spooky old building. It is a spooky old building. But I don't think there's a tunnel underneath it that runs to base. This rumor seems to originate in the idea that that hospital used to be a Navy hospital. The problem with that is that building was a Navy hospital when that building was literally located on base. And it's another situation where the Navy said, well, we don't need this building anymore, but it seems pretty valuable. Let's sell it. And so the Navy sold it to someone who dismantled it and took it off base and then rebuilt it at 7th and Chester. And when it was rebuilt, it was no longer a naval hospital. So there is no reason for there to have ever been a tunnel that runs from 7th and Chester onto base. Because once that building left base, it was not a Navy hospital anymore. And there probably are some dead ends and blocked off areas. I looked at some videos on YouTube, some very old videos, of like gated areas and blocked off places in the Frank Chop Apartments, but they're not tunnels that run to base. That hospital existed for many, many years and used to have lots of outbuildings and different facilities on the campus. And I think it's more likely that these blocked off places just used to go to other buildings, or old hospitals historically used to run, separate tunnels down to places like the morgue, so that everyday people in the hospital didn't have to see when dead bodies were being brought down to the morgue. So it's more likely that tunnels under there just went to other buildings. I don't think they're running to the base. Anyway, but back to downtown. So, downtown buildings, rumored tunnels that run out towards the cliff face in the water, may be used during Prohibition to smuggle in booze or to smuggle out sailors being shanghaied. all kinds of wild rumors on that. Although most of the buildings mentioned in those stories, they were in the old blocks of downtown that got torn down to make way for the new ferry dock that went in when I was a teenager. You know, the ferry dock, the conference center, the fountain parks. But who knows? Maybe that's somehow part of the reason why they decided to tear it all down. Do you have a question about Bremerton or its history? I want to hear it. You can find the show on social media at Bremelore or visit the website www.bremelore.wtf. That's right, you heard me. Bremelore.whiskey tango foxtrot to leave me a voice message. I can't wait to hear from you. It was also common during World War II to see barrage balloons. Why is this sentence so... This is a bad sentence. All right, let's start over.